My name is Kimberly Kuhlman, and I serve as the Executive Director for the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association. And we're so excited to broadcast our first webinar today, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this. The webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded onto our website and our YouTube channel and through social media. We know it's always challenging with times that are convenient for everyone, so that's why we record this. Just a few housekeeping matters. We expect the webinar to last about an hour or so. There is a chat function that if you have questions, you can feel free to send a message, and we will answer questions either during the presentation or at the end. And this is really an opportunity for you to ask questions and learn more and such. We are excited to have Dorothy Tannahill-Moran with us today. Dorothy has spasmodic dysphonia along with essential tremor, but she is also known as the Introvert Whisperer. Dorothy is a career coach, and she has been working with the organization through writing wonderful articles for us on advice on career counseling, along with presenting at our symposium in May this past in Dallas. This presentation was actually presented at the symposium and was well received, and so we wanted to have the opportunity to present it in webinar format now. Dorothy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay. Well, the first thing that I'm going to do here is pause, because I've discovered that I can't talk and computer at the same time, and I want to be able to make sure that everybody can see my slides. So my first order of business here is to get the slides going. Yeah, just as I thought, I can't see the screen. So I'm going to have to do a screen share. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see the slides. Can you see the slides, Kimberly? Yeah. Okay, super. I will put these up and get going. All right, so thanks for taking your precious time and attending or listening to this recording. So you heard all the background from Kimberly. And I want to also get into a little bit of a history of why this presentation, why this topic on self-esteem and confidence. But safe to say, it's kind of a nasty little secret that a lot of us actually have about ourselves, that we don't always feel confident, or self-esteem is not where it should be. And it can be a problem. I'll get into all of that in just a few seconds. So safe to say that this might be something we don't like to admit to ourselves. Well, there was a kindergarten teacher that got up in front of the class, and today she was going to teach about confidence and self-esteem. So she said, okay, class, I want anybody who thinks they're a dummy to stand up. Now, a little time goes by, nobody is standing up, and the teacher is thinking, wow, everybody really thinks pretty highly of themselves. They're feeling good about themselves. But suddenly little Johnny stands up. The teacher says, well, Johnny, do you think you're a dummy? Do you not think too well of yourself? Johnny says, no, ma'am. I just didn't want you to stand up here by yourself. So if you will, here we had a whole class of students, kindergartners, and none of them were willing to admit that they necessarily had a self-esteem problem. Now, it's not fun, of course, to be able to make that admission, and I know that a lot of us even just are reluctant to openly discuss it. So I did some polling on this subject, and I'm going to talk about that as we get into the body of this. But to give you a little bit of background about myself, I used to live in Portland until 5 years ago, and now I live outside of Kansas City. And during that time, I spent a number of years alone by myself with my SD. So I had been diagnosed, and I could not find any kind of group or organization. Things like Facebook were not that prevalent. So safe to say I was out there in the great Northwest pretty much on my own. So I had nobody to share my experience with. And I never actually even heard another person who sounded like myself. But the deal was, I never thought about doing anything differently professionally or personally because of what was taking place with my voice. Because by that point in time, life had already dealt me a number of different challenges, and not the least of which is I am Dorothy from Kansas. So Dorothy moved back to Kansas about 5 years ago. So it does have a certain amount of baggage with it. And of course, that wasn't exactly traumatic or challenging, but certainly one of those things that I share with people just so they kind of remember me. But what started changing for me is I eventually went to a voice rehabilitation clinic. And then I started getting exposed to other people who had SD. There was 6 people there. In fact, one of them was from Spain and the rest from all of the United States. After I moved from Oregon to Kansas City, then I got affiliated with an SD support group. And more I started getting acquainted with people with SD. And what I noticed was that a number of the people really did have confidence issues, have self-esteem issues. They had a number of things take place, transpire in their life simply because their voice sounded kind of funny. So if you will, I met a number of people with SD that had depression, low self-esteem, confidence issues. And it wasn't across the board, but I certainly noticed that there was kind of a consistent theme. So that's why I'm here today, is to talk to you about rebuilding your self-esteem and rebuilding your confidence. Now, as we get into this, I'm going to cover a number of different things, but also let me just add to one of the things that Kim shared with you about me. While I am a career coach, I'm also, at the heart of it, a certified life coach, which means that while I specialize in anything having to do with your advancement and your success professionally, at the heart of it is me looking holistically at the individual. I have worked with people who've had some confidence issues. And of course, oftentimes that manifests itself in issues professionally and certainly personally. So if you don't think you can rebuild it, just know that's all in your head. So my goal today is to first increase your consciousness about the state of your own confidence and self-esteem. In other words, let's spend a minute thinking about how we feel about ourselves and perhaps the situation or situations that crop up where that's not the case. Then I want to be able to provide you with some tools that's going to help boost your confidence and boost your self-esteem for you to use as a tool now and any time in the future, with the bottom line goal of I want you to feel good about you. To get on the same page here in terms of talking about self-esteem and confidence, I put a little bit of definition here just so we're all talking about the same thing. Confidence and satisfaction in one's own self-worth and abilities, a certain level of self-respect. So in other words, self-esteem reflects your overall subjective emotional evaluation of your worth. It's a judgment of yourself, and it's also an attitude about yourself. So there's a number of aspects that go into confidence and self-esteem. And yes, I do put those two things together because I think they're so closely knit together that it behooves us to use those two terms, at least for the sake of today's webinar. together. So think of this: attitude, self-evaluation, emotional, subjective evaluation, self-respect, your self-worth. Now let's take a peek for a second here. And as I go through and talk about what causes low self-esteem, I'd like for you to think about what might be causing your low self-esteem and confidence. Generally, it has multiple causes, not just one thing. Now, maybe there's one thing that may be more predominant than some of the other things, but I think as I go through this list, you'll notice that there's going to be either situations or a state of being that you might be in that is caused or driven largely by one of these things. So usually it's a couple. The first one is what I call abuse from the environment, such things as maybe your friends or family still don't totally understand, and they keep waiting for you to get over your voice problem. I hear that a lot, especially in an SD group on Facebook, that it's like, oh, I get so frustrated with people, especially my family members. And of course, if you can't even explain to your family members that get to talk to you a whole lot, then that may be impacting you personally. People that you work with, you could have just random encounters with people, say in a restaurant, where they might say something like, are you getting sad? Are you crying? No, leave me alone. I'm okay. And of course, things like your boss, which is always really special when your boss decides that it's like, I don't know what's wrong with your voice, but you need to speak up. Does that sound familiar? Now, another thing could be driving this is what I call a violation of your self-image. Let's face it, when we think about ourselves, whether or not consciously or unconsciously, we think in a composition. We think about, I'm this tall, I've got this color of hair, I'm about this fat or this skinny, I sound like this, I have these kind of habits, and all of that goes into the mix of your self-image. Now, I'm sure you probably have other adjectives, but when something gets out of alignment with your self-image, and in this case, we're talking about your voice, that can violate your concept of who you are. Also, you could be experiencing negative thought patterns. Now, a lot of times negative thought patterns can be derived or existing since childhood. They could be exacerbated by your voice, or maybe you never had those negative thought patterns, but you started cooking up a few since getting your SD. You could have challenges associated with working or daily functioning, like everybody's personal favorite, which is being on the telephone, or going through a drive-through and trying to order a cheeseburger at your favorite McDonald's. These kinds of things are almost reinforcing that it's like, something is wrong with my voice. I've got to repeat myself 4 times. This is really not fun. And in fact, it's exhausting. Some of these next couple of issues get into where I get particularly sensitive, and that's discrimination, especially on the job, or harassment, especially on the job. And I have heard of people who have SD with these issues all the way and including losing a job. Now, most of the people who are losing a job or have lost a job who have SD, in my experience, that becomes a choice. I always try to talk them out of it because I think there's always alternatives, but sometimes that's involuntary. I spoke to a person just last year who had lost their job involuntarily, and it was as a direct result of their voice. Lastly is exclusion. Nobody loves being left out either at work or personally, and that really, really hurts. So any of this list or a combination of this list could be contributing to your confidence and self-esteem. Now, the reason why I think it's important to look at these kinds of things is because from a problem-solving perspective, and right now we're going to consider any impact, any lowering of your confidence and self-esteem to be a problem for us to solve. So it's important for us to really systemically look at what might be going into the mix of your confidence issues. Because if you attack it with the wrong tools or the wrong approach, it's not going to make any difference. Now, let me take a sip here. Because, of course, when I'm done today, my voice and myself are going to feel like we've just run a marathon. But this is important stuff, and I really want to share it with you. I think it's really important for us to understand the impact, because it could be very easy for us to just retreat into our own little cocoon at home, stay away from people, stay away from those nasty drive-thrus, not make telephone calls, these kinds of things. But it's important for you to understand the problems that start getting created as a result of having low confidence and low self-esteem, because there are problems that start manifesting. So you might think, oh, I just feel kind of ucky and nasty every so often, or in general, I kind of feel like that, but I don't really think it causes problems. If it hasn't caused problems for you, you're a lucky person. But I'm going to bet that there's probably some of these problems that have or do exist. You don't want to have these kind of problems because they will impact your life. Your confidence does affect how you behave, and it does affect your attitude. So you can become defeatist, you can start retreating, you can start not really relishing and empowering yourself to share your knowledge and your skills in the biggest way you possibly could. It can affect how you think and how you problem solve. And again, it's one of those things where if you come at a problem with a positive perspective, you're going to look at your possibilities differently and see more possibilities than you would if you were feeling negative and having a low self-esteem. It can be the difference between you being successful or a failure at something, just simply because maybe you're retreating and you're not giving it your very best simply because you're holding back, you're lacking that confidence. It can negatively impact your work. Just this last month, I had a person that I was coaching with, which, by the way, if you're listening to this, I am your free gratis career coach and life coach. So please contact me if you've got a problem that I can help you through. But I was talking to this woman, and she had deliberately separated herself from the clients coming into their office. She wasn't answering the phone very much. People were starting to think she was slacking off because she wasn't answering the phone and she wasn't interacting with clients very much. If you can imagine all of this, the clients thought she was unfriendly and difficult. Her bosses thought she was getting lazy or just not picking up her fair share. Her coworkers thought they were having to pick up the slack from her. This was the farthest thing from what she was hoping to accomplish. She just thought because of her voice, nobody wanted to interact with her. That's what I'm talking about, because if she continues to do that sort of thing, she could get fired because she wasn't doing the fullest scope of her job that she could because of her retreating. Also, people will treat you with less respect and lower regard. When you don't feel good about you, other people don't feel good about you either. They believe you. And of course, you create barriers where really none other than what you create in your own mind exists. I mean, look at me. I'm doing a webinar, for goodness sakes. And I've continued to do them since the moment that I was diagnosed with SD. So it can limit your growth as well as your happiness. In addition to that, self-esteem can impact your own motivation. You'll feel less likely to go do things and to take care of yourself and to really live up to your potential and your truest power. You become less resilient to change because suddenly you become focused on your voice, and it stresses you out to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go to this restaurant today with my girlfriend and order something, and I'm going to have to repeat myself 3 times. And of course, all of this can lead to depression, which is never great. The bottom line is it's a problem, and you don't feel good about yourself, but it does show. You might think you're hiding it, but you're not. Now, before I get into the actions, things that you could do to help rebuild your self-esteem and confidence, I just want you to see some statistics. I did a survey and I asked one very simple question. Well, actually, I asked 2. One is, what do you do to make yourself feel better and more confident? But the first question was how people rated their self-esteem and confidence on a 1 to 5 scale. 1 being, I feel very low confidence and self-esteem, and 5, I feel very balanced and healthy overall with my confidence and self-esteem. So you'll see that the majority of people answered right there in the center. And in the center, it says equal times of high and low, but trending towards low. So if you will, you could almost split that up and say about half of those people are trending towards the left side of this chart. Now, why do I share that? Well, I share it because I wanted to make the point that there's a good, strong chance that you probably have some confidence issues. Maybe not day in and day out, maybe not 24/7, but you may periodically have situations where your self-confidence wanes. Or you could be wearing it like a coat 24/7. It's hard to say, but in any case, what this is saying, my analysis of this is, the good news is 36% of you feel pretty good about yourself, and that's great. You know, that's a great percentage. 41% were in the center, but is trending towards low. So here's the news for the improvement out there for people with SD. 18% of you were definitely low or very low in terms of how you saw your confidence and self-esteem. If you want to add to that, some of the 41% in the middle, we're looking at a healthy chunk of people in our demographic, in our group with our particular disorder, that's really got some room for improvement. So now what we're going to do, and I think you may have the note sheets here. These are some actions. I'm going to drill down on these 6 right here, talk about them a little bit more, and also get into some specific actions that you can take. Now, at the very end, I'm also going to display a laundry list of other goodies that you guys answered in that survey about things that you do that help boost your confidence. So if you will, you're going to walk away with a ton of things in your toolkit that you can use every day from this point forward. So let's take a peek at these. Now, the reason why I've got these little animated guys at the bottom doing some step-ups is because, well, you're going to the gym. You're going to have to start working on some stuff. So some of these things, It's just like a muscle. If you don't do it, you're not going to build your resilience and you're not going to build your self-esteem. So you're going to go to the gym. The first item that I talk about is eliminating the inner critic. Some people really have some nasty inner critics. You give yourself the most powerful message of all. What goes in and out of your brain, what you say to yourself, whether or not you say it out loud or you say it inside of your mind, you believe it. So if you're saying it to yourself, if you're saying, oh man, nobody wants to hear from me, or I just give up, I'm not even going to try because it's just too difficult and nobody can hear me. You start believing these things. So your inner critic has to get tamed. It has to. It also can become a habit, which is the reason why you got to think of this as a workout, because you may not even be that consciously aware of your own inner critic. I want you to start talking to yourself like you would talk to somebody you love. And a lot of times the people that I talk to that do have confidence issues, they're much nicer to other people than they are to themselves. Here's some things that you can do. This sounds abundantly easy. I get it. But just because something looks easy doesn't mean it's not effective. And just because it's easy doesn't really mean that it is. Okay? Because this is first catching yourself. Your first action is awareness. You have to become aware of your inner critic. When is it saying mean things to you? When is it saying less than positive things to you? When you become aware of those, then catch yourself and take the second action, which is to replace what you're saying with a positive statement. And you have to be very careful to avoid the use of negatives with your positive statement. Third is continue to do this, because over time, the more you catch yourself and replace with a positive statement, the less that will take place. Again, this is like, a muscle workout. Your brain and the habit will get reestablished as a new, more positive habit. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about here in terms of statements. Let's just say that your inner critic said, nobody wants to listen to me because of my voice. You need to stop yourself and replace it with, what I have to share is important to others. Because it is. Your opinion and your thoughts are as important and valuable as other people's are. But sometimes we think in terms of negative replacements. So that's the reason why I want to point that out. What you don't want to say is, I shouldn't stay silent, because the brain actually removes negative things like not, and it hears, I should stay silent. So that's the reason why you want to very carefully avoid the use of any kind of negative words like not, never, whatever. When I'm trying to curb my desire for eating sweet things, I don't say don't eat sweet things. I say eliminate my desire for sweet. Okay, so hopefully you can hear the difference. Get rid of your inner critic. Be kind and loving to yourself. The next element, next action, is avoid comparing yourself to others. Trust me, if you're comparing yourself against anybody, whether or not it's a person with a good voice or another person with SD, there's always going to be a positive and a negative to a comparison. And it's going to be, the result of this is going to be negative self-talk. That is never going to be good for you. It can lead to jealousy, unhappiness, resentment, and it's focusing on the negative because it's like this versus this. Good voice versus bad voice. My voice versus this other person's voice. Don't make comparisons. Because trust me, there's always going to be people in this life that are going to be able to do things better than you. They're going to have more. They're going to sound better than you. They're going to be more beautiful or handsome than you. You can always find somebody, if you try, that's going to end up, I'll just say, being better. But what's the use in that? There's absolutely zero value in comparing yourself to anybody else. So just don't do it. What I suggest, and if you happen to be comparing, is look for inspiration for your own personal growth. One of the great things about NSDA is they try to put all kinds of great role models in front of you as a source of inspiration. So look for people that inspire you, whether or not they have SD, or whether or not they're a person who has achieved things despite challenges and adversity. Whatever it is that inspires you, find those people, get inspired by them, and help them become, let them become your role model. And if you're doing comparisons, just like in the previous inner critic thing, you need to replace that and stop doing comparisons. It's never going to be okay. Another thing that sometimes we tend to do is to live in the past and talk about how things used to be. Well, my voice used to sound like this. Abuse from our own environment. My mother, when she was still alive, and I, of course, had SD diagnosed, even said, "Oh, honey, you used to have such a nice voice." And I just told her, I said, my voice is different. It's just more interesting now. And I was going to deflect that because I'm not going to live in the past. The deal is you can't change the past, no matter how good or bad it might have been. But here's one of the things that's true. We all tend to look at the past in extremes. We think it's so much better than it really was, or it's so much worse than it really was. So if you're reflecting on things in the past and comparing them, this kind of form of comparing them to how things are now, that's also not going to be helpful, because you continue to change throughout your life, whether or not it's your voice or your set of circumstances. And yeah, you can be nostalgic and think, oh, wasn't that fun? I did this thing. Whatever the case, I had this accomplishment. But don't linger on it. And certainly don't compare to how you are today. Because trust me, you're probably overthinking it. You're probably thinking it's much better than it used to, than you are right now. One of the other things about living in the past, and we had a friend who very much lived in the past, it undermines your current relationships. So whether or not it's a spouse or friendships or people that you're working with, if you continuously litter your conversations with going backwards in time and reflecting on those things, you're not living present. You're not presently being involved with that person. They don't appreciate it. One of the other things that you could be doing by making this past an ever-present element is creating unrealistic standards. Well, I should be like this because that's how my voice used to be. No, your voice is different. Even if you improve it, it's different. And that can impact you. Keep in mind, you're constantly changing, and focusing on the past is really not going to help you necessarily as you are today. I suggest one of the biggest actions that you can take, I love this, and I've been doing this for the past couple of years, is to focus on feelings of gratitude and consider initiating a 30-day gratitude challenge. And a gratitude challenge is just simply taking the next 30 days and every day identifying at least one thing that you're grateful for. It doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with your voice. It can if you want it to. But gratitude is, I was grateful for all of the bakers in the universe because I think it's proof that God wants me to be happy. So I love every bakery I've ever been in and every baked good I've ever purchased. So I'm always really grateful about those kinds of things. So see, it doesn't have anything to do with my voice necessarily. But one of the things that I am grateful for having to do with my SD is I feel I'm definitely much more sensitive to other people and their experiences in life. So consider a 30-day challenge. Being grateful is one of the best feel-good pills you can ever take. Obviously, I'm a proponent of it. And if you want me to take the 30-day challenge with you, just say something, because I always love to feel great and I always love to express my gratitude and to think about the things I'm grateful for. Self-reflection. This is where your brain is going to hurt, okay? We tend to not self-reflect nearly as much as we should. Some people do this almost naturally. Other people avoid it as much as they can. When you become more self-aware and you build more emotional intelligence, it helps you to feel good about yourself, and it makes you appreciate and interact with others more effectively. Emotional intelligence is just another way of talking about your effective interactions with others. When you're self-reflecting, you're understanding your emotions, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what makes you feel grateful. It allows you to understand, what are you strong at, what are you weak at, what are your values, what are your goals, and to recognize those things and the impact on others. This can give you a path towards really appreciating yourself so much more. Once you really can see, gee, when I do this, I can see these other people really feel good about themselves. And that makes me feel good if I can make other people joyful. Also, when you're self-reflecting, it gives you a different perception of you and the world around you. One of the things that I keep repeating to people with SD, and I occasionally hear people with SD say this as well, is I'm way more focused on my voice than other people are. Oh yeah, that's so much the case. Get out of your head. Keep, stop thinking about your voice so much. You're more focused on it than everybody else in the world is. So, does all that focus really do you any good? Usually it doesn't. Usually it just makes you stressed out or frustrated or something. Get out of your head. Start thinking about other people and your impact on other people. As you are self-reflecting, this can also be a gateway to inspire a plan for self-improvement. And I personally think that when you're doing some things to improve yourself, you're going to start feeling great about yourself. Here's some actions that you can take if you choose to do a self-reflection exercise. Ask yourself some questions like, what are my strengths? Am I a person that people can respect? And if they do, what do they respect me for? What do people seek me out for? Am I meeting my own expectations? Do I have goals? Do I have things that I'm striving for? And if so, what are those things? And where am I going in life? And what would I like to be able to say I've achieved a year from now? And what would really get me excited? So self-reflection is really just asking yourself a lot of good, tough questions. And if that list of questions isn't good, just ask me. I'll give you some more self-reflection questions. Learn to be assertive. One of the things I hear from other people with SD is this aspect of retreating. And the retreating does have to do with not necessarily asserting your opinion and asserting yourself the way you used to or the way that you should. You have to learn to advocate for yourself, and you need to do it without being self-righteous. People can appreciate you establishing boundaries. People can appreciate you advocating for yourself. Nobody appreciates anybody who's going to be self-righteous. Well, you need to treat me like this because of my voice. No, but if you need, you can certainly, and of course, when I'm doing a webinar or talk to people who don't have SD, I always quickly explain it. My voice sounds funny because I have a vocal cord disorder. Then I just keep going. People just don't really, they're really not concerned about it, but it does explain what they're experiencing with me. The thing about being assertive is it assumes that your opinion, your input is equally as important as anybody else's. Being assertive does have a language. It sounds something like, my opinion is, I disagree with this, I need this assistance. So in other words, it's not being emotional or angry, and in some cases, humor helps. Sometimes when I start a webinar or a talk, I'll tell a story about my worst boss. And then I'll say, now you would think that the residual effect of that is PTSD, and that's why my voice sounds like this, but it turns out that it's a vocal cord disorder. And everybody always thinks that's pretty cute. So I try to yuck it up just a little bit with a sense of humor, but understand nobody appreciates self-righteous. Nobody appreciates or listens if you get angry or emotional. Some things to consider if you think that you've got some issues with being assertive is there are tons of things on the internet as well as books that you can read, you can practice. I suggest thinking about situations where you could have been assertive, but perhaps you weren't or weren't as assertive as you could have been. So you might think about your own specific situations and to think about how you could have constructed that differently or how you could have advocated for yourself differently. I mean, there's whole classes on these sort of things, and I've certainly done assertive training. So again, you don't have to be emotional with these kinds of things, but you do have to advocate. So read, practice if that's one of your issues. Be kind, help others. Let me tell you, as feel-good pills go, in addition to finding things to feel grateful for, is to help others. When you help others, it makes you feel good about yourself. Focusing on others also will help you shift your focus away from yourself as well as your voice. I suggest you go volunteer. That's the reason why I do some of the things that I do. I do volunteer work. I write articles for NSDA. I coach anybody with SD. Again, complimentary, no cost, because it makes me feel good. I can use my talent, my background, and skills. And I do want to share these things. You can too, in all kinds of different ways. So another good feel-good pill for you. Now, this could be titled slightly different, handling mistakes, failures, challenges. I really think it's more about effectively handling challenges, but it has kind of the same approach, because people handle challenges pretty much this, and that challenge or failure, just admit it. Just, hey, I can't talk nearly as loud as I should in this situation. Figure out how or what to do differently the next time. So learn from your failures, learn from your challenges, and move on. Now, if you truly owe somebody an apology, then apologize, but don't dwell on it, and certainly don't self-persecute yourself for something. And don't apologize if your actions did not impact others. And one of the biggest issues that I've seen around handling challenges and failures is stop being a perfectionist. Nobody's perfect. And it's really not a badge of honor for you or for other people if you go around beating on yourself because of a challenge or a failure of some sort. Again, repeating myself, have a sense of humor about things. So with a failure, with a challenge, get ridiculous, get lighthearted. So recognize that SD isn't a mistake or a failure. It's just simply how you work. It's like, well, I'm also not an opera singer. And, I accept that just the same way I accept the fact that I've got blue eyes. So it's not a mistake or failure. It's just how you function. And of course, recognize that others are going to have difficulty hearing you, understanding you, and you want to develop more tolerance for them, just as you want them to be more supportive of you. You may have to be more tolerant first before they give you what you need. Who knows? So possible actions here is to reflect on how you react to mistakes and challenges. Do you react the same or different when somebody else is doing something that's difficult or challenging? Do you get frustrated with others who have physical challenges or voice challenges? If so, then you probably have some work. Are your expectations of yourself realistic? Because a lot of times people who don't handle challenges and failures well really are not realistic about themselves. And with whatever is taking place, can you move forward without any kind of guilt or shame? Again, this is a little bit of a self-reflection thing, but is one of our bigger issues. Now, that's my drill down on those 6 goodies. And I'm going to just briefly point out some of the things on this list here. You can read it yourself. If Kimberly has any questions for me, I can answer those. But as I go through this list, there's a couple of these I would like to really, really point out and put asterisks next to. Set goals and challenge yourself. One of the things that I often see is that people quit setting goals. They quit striving for things. And when you're burning to accomplish something, your voice really is like the least of your concerns, or certainly it's one among many things when you've got a goal. So get a goal that you just absolutely feel passionately about. The other thing I would encourage you to consider is to communicate openly about SD, both in terms of advocating for yourself, but also in terms of helping to educate other people. And trust me, I've not always used the term spasmodic dysphonia with people, just simply because it's just a huge mouthful, and nobody's going to remember it unless they've heard it several times and maybe even seen it written down. those are my two asterisk here things: set goals and communicate openly about SD. With that, I bid you fond adieu, but I'm going to check with Kimberly and see if there's any questions that I can answer.
Thank you, Dorothy. It was a wonderful presentation, and we appreciate it. We didn't receive any questions through the chat function. If any of the attendees have any questions, please feel free. I'm also going to, I shared a link on the notes page. So if you hadn't had a chance to download that yet, the link is in the chat function. And if anyone does have a question and they want to raise their hand, they can do that too, and we can unmute you. We have just a few more minutes, but we have a smaller group here, so we have the ability to do something a little different on this webinar.
Yeah, cool. And also, my email address is dorothy@introvertwhisperer.com. You're welcome to email me, and I'm not one of these people that get emails and not reply. I always reply. So if I can answer any questions about confidence and self-esteem, or any kind of questions that I can help you with, I'm always happy to help.
And we will send out a follow-up email that will have Dorothy's email along with the links to the presentation, slides, and the notes page. And probably in the next few days, we will have this recording available online too, so you can listen to it again if there is something you missed or need a little pep talk. Well, no questions have come through, so we will we can wrap up. And again, on behalf of the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association, we thank you, Dorothy, for your time and your talent and your insight into this wonderful topic that's so important and crucial to everyone, not just those with SD. So we really do appreciate you taking the time, and to everyone who joined us, we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar.
Thanks. Thanks, Kimberly.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.